Hello everyone. Hello, welcome to this AZ-104 review. I'm Andre Rodriguez. I'll be your host today. So let me know here to the chat if you can hear me well, if you can see me well. I'm not in the best lighting setup, so I have some natural light here. I am in the Microsoft Office right now. So we will get started with this Azure 104 review. Thank you very much for being here, and let's get started. Well, let me share my screen right now, and we will start this review. All right, so let me share this screen right here. Okay, there we go. All right, I'll put this picture in picture so you can see this well. Yeah, very good. So the Azure Administrator is the certification that you get when you get the AZ-104 exam. So, and this exam is divided by five big blocks: manage Azure identities and governance, implement and manage storage, deploy and manage Azure compute resources, configure and manage virtual networking, and monitor and maintain Azure resources. We'll talk about all those five blocks. But before we start, I need to um, give you some considerations. Well, first, this is not a content enough for the exam. So if you have seen nothing about Azure 104, you cannot just turn off this browser after this review and go for the exam. No, that's not the intention. This review is for people that are looking to start studying for the AZ-104. So if you got the AZ-900 or you are just browsing around what AZ-104 is about, this is perfect for you. So it's going to be a long video, long review. So grab some coffee and you are all come be my guest. Second, people that are studying for the exam right now. So if you are just in the middle of your studies, or if you are just reviewing things that you are seeing for weeks, so this is going to be perfect for you. So you can review every things that you are already studying. And the third block of people that this is going to be interested for people that have already studied for the exam. You feel that you just need little more knowledge to go for the exam. So if you are just browsing about the AZ-104 and you want to see like a big picture, that's going to be perfect. If you are studying right now, if and you want to see if you are doing well, it's perfect for you too. And if you have studied already and you want to see again and be more confident for the exam, be my guest as well. All right? So let's get started with the content. First, I prefer, before we talk about identities and governance, I prefer start talking about Azure um, infrastructure. Okay, just to you to understand the big picture about Azure. So let's say that you are already an Azure administrator, and you are in a meeting. So let's call you Bob, right? So Bob, you are in a mission which is explain for the CIO, for the CISO, for the CFO why you should move to Azure. As an Azure administrator, that's your role. So you need to understand what Azure is and how can you get this. And let's say that the CIO, which is Brenda, Brenda knows about AZ-900 Azure Fundamentals. So Brenda knows what is cloud. Brenda knows what is the the public cloud, the private cloud, the hybrid cloud. Brenda knows what is those services that Azure has. What is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Of course, she's a CIO, right? But not exactly about Azure. She knows pretty much. So this is your job. This is your role right now. So let's start saying that you, Bob, you will explain like this. Look, Azure is our um, cloud platform that we have chosen to use. So as you know, Azure belongs to Microsoft, so it's the main cloud platform from Azure today. All right, so how can you start implementing Azure thinking about infrastructure? You need to explain that Azure is developing in multi regions. So you have like a Azure infrastructure backbone right here. So this is the wide area network, and the regions, they are connected right here. And we have a lot of regions when you can develop around the globe. Okay, we will have like 50, 60 regions when you can develop your resources, no problem. But what is inside those regions? So inside those regions we have our facilities, our data centers, but we have a special name for that. We call those facilities availability zones. Those availability zones, of course, they are connected together, and they will provide, so this is a region, this is another region. Yeah, there are some regions that when you don't have availability zones, multi availability zones, you just have one, for example, but they are all connected, and you can use one single region to develop your resources, or you can use multiple regions to develop your applications, your solutions. So with this in mind, we can say that one availability zone is going to be the facility when my resources could be, or I can distribute my resources among those availability zones, and I can have more availability and I can have more resilience from my resources. Okay, so this is the basic things that you need to know. More than that, we can have more regions per geography. And this is good to talk with the CIO and the CISO because normally you have compliance standards that you need to follow. So with these compliance standards, they say like your data cannot be outside some country. For example, if you are from Brazil, probably you have some concerns about where is my data. I cannot send my data outside Brazil. So we have regions available to you in your geography. Some geographies they have just one region, other they have more regions. For example, United States, you have 9 regions in the US geography. So this is a geopolitical boundaries for your resources. So you can allocate resources in multiple regions in the same geography. So you can just keep compliant with your standards. So let's say this is region one is East US, and this second region here is West US. We have South Central US, we have East US 2, we have 9 regions available right now in the United States. So this is geography. All right? Okay. So now, Bob, you have explained to Brenda, and Brenda said, okay, all right. So I know that Azure is uh, available around the globe, and to be compliant with our standards, we can distribute our resources among the availability zones, which is Azure resources or Azure data centers. I know which is a geography. I know we can have multiple regions, etc., etc. But Bob, I want to know how can we start moving to Azure? And that's why you as a Azure administrator can help me to have a plan. to move to Azure. And you said, well, okay, no problem. Just I think we could start with identity platform. Oh yeah, Brenda said. Tell me more about it. All right, no problem. What is a identity platform that we have right now? You asked. And Brenda said, well, I think what we are using right now, if I remember, is Azure is Windows Active Directory or Active Directory Domain Services. Yeah, exactly. You are completely right, you said. So now what normally companies have is Active Directory Domain Services, right? And Active Directory Domain Services is our um, directory services. So how can we move this to Azure, and how can we start using Azure as our identity platform? Let me just put here that I can follow if anything is happening here, and let me know if you can see me well, if you can hear me well. Let me know through the chat, okay? Let me just change a little bit the things right here because I cannot see everything I need. So I have multiple monitors, but yeah, now I can. All right, good. So how can we start using this platform and how this platform can help us? Brenda said. All right, Brenda, what we have here is something called Azure AD. Azure AD. Azure AD is different than Active Directory Domain Services because Active Directory Domain Services is our directory services, and Azure AD is an identity platform. We have many difference about it. First of all, this is in globally available in Azure. So do you remember the regions and the things that we have called? We have seen. We don't have this for Azure AD. You don't need to set up a region when your Azure AD is going to be. We don't need to spin up any virtual machines. Azure is a platform. Do you remember that we have infrastructure as a service, platform as a service? So Azure is going to be there for me, available as a solution, right? So I don't need to be aware about how many resources I have to connect my users, how many users do I have, or what the if I have any problems about availability. I don't need to take care about it because this is a platform when I can have my users, and I have my users from the cloud, I have users from on premises, I can have users from another um, another domain. Oh yeah, tell me more about it, Brenda said. So you will see that in Azure AD, what we have, we need to create our directory. Our directory we call tenant. We can have multiple tenants. Our first tenant, when we start creating this one, is going to be our name, like my company name, dot on Microsoft.com. But of course, I know we don't want to use the onmicrosoft.com domain, so we can have our custom domain. So we can go there and we can have our custom domain. The only thing that we need to do, we need to verify that we are the owners of this domain. So this is quite easy. To go to Azure custom domains and you will verify with some DNS um, data that you are the owner of this domain. All right. All right. Good. So now that we have our Azure AD instance, we have our tenant, and we can have multiple tenants if we want. If you are holding and you have multiple domains, you can have multiple tenants as well. But we don't we don't have any user in this domain right now in Azure AD right now, but we can start doing this. We have our users here in the on-premises environment. So this is the on-prem environment, and we have our users right here. And what we want to have the same users in Azure. So this is the first user type that we can have. Those users, they will be synchronized using a tool that can be Azure AD Connect or Cloud Sync. They have some differences that's not important for the AZ-104 right now. I invite you to keep connected, and we will see the SC300, which is 100% dedicated to Azure AD, so we can see all the details about this solution. Okay? Okay, so those users, they're going to be members because they belong to the same they belong to the same domain. So they are from my domain, and they are synchronized, and we can see in the Azure portal when they are synchronized. Okay, and how they have been synchronized. All right, so those users, I know how I can have this one right here. And okay, Bob, but you told me that we have more users. All right, we can have users from other domains. Those users, they can be my guest users. Those users can come from Microsoft library. Um, those users can be um, from Facebook, from Google. Those ones can be from other domains, from other Azure AD. So they are just not from my domain. Actually, I can have a user from my domain, and I can set this user as a guest. But just to keep things simple for the AZ-104 and for this explanation to the CIO, you just say that the guests, they are from other domains, and I can have multiple identity providers for those users. And you can check out all the documentation for the details when you really need to finish your studies for the AZ-104, right? And the other ones that you can have is the cloud users. Those users, they are members in my domain, but they just exist in the cloud. So they use resources from the cloud. Example, here in the on-prem environment, I have printing services, right? I have other services locally here. Those cloud users, they don't have access to this one. And actually, this synchronization is in this direction. So the users from on-prem to the cloud. So the cloud users, they won't be synchronized to the on-prem environment, right? Okay, but how can we get access to our applications because we are using our identity platform here on premises to connect to our applications? How can we use this in Azure? You can have your applications here in Azure even if they are your applications, those applications are in the cloud, but we have not migrated right now. So this is going to be on-prem applications. I can do it. I can authenticate my users using Azure AD, even if my application is in here on premises in some machine. So my app is right here, but I can register my app in the Azure AD, and I can use a proxy to reach my application inside with no VPN. And I can use my cloud, my all the identities into the cloud and use it Azure AD as my central point of connection. All right. I can group those users. I can create groups. So those groups, they can be for M365 when they share SharePoint, when they share um, 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 mail services, when they share other Microsoft 365 resources. And the other one is the security group when they will do things in Azure. Okay, they will share resources in Azure. All right, so the security one, let's talk about the Microsoft 365 are the group types that we can have. Let's talk about the assignment. How, for example, this user right here is Alex. So Bob, how Alex can be assigned to a group? How can we know which group we can assign Alex or not? Well, you can assign guest user, cloud users, or synchronized users for any groups. The only thing that you want to know is how they can be assigned. First, they can be assigned manually. So this is like how can you do the assignment? So they will be assigned manually. So you just grab them and put there. Okay? So you need to control everything. But also they can do this in a dynamic way. So it can be dynamic. For the dynamic assignment, what we are going to use is user attributes. So let's say I know that Alex belongs to the IT department, but Shane belongs to the HR department. Alex has some job title. Shane has another job title. We can use those attributes because they are there for those users, and you can say, look, for everyone that belongs to the IT department, this is the IT group. We can use the city, the country. We can use many attributes to dynamically using queries. The Azure AD will put those users in the correct group. But I need to pause here right now to talk about this. Azure AD and the you, Bob, you're going to say, look, Brenda, Azure AD, they have licenses. So not everything is free. We can use many things for free, but for example, to use hybrid identities that we are talking right now, to use these dynamic groups, we need some licenses. Those licenses, they can be free, they can come from the Office 365, but to do these dynamic assignments and to use the hybrid identities, we need to have premium licenses. Those premium licenses can be Premium 1 or Premium 2. So what is that? We can have Premium 1 and we can have Premium 2. For example, of course, that everything that I can do with P1, I can do with P2. But the main difference that we are going to start seeing right now is first, for the P1, for the group assignment, I can have dynamic groups. I don't have this for the free version. And of course, I have for the P2 as well. So that's the first one. For hybrid identities, same thing. But we will see more things that we only um, can do with the P1 or P2. Okay, so now those users, I know what is a user, what is a group, etc., etc. But Brenda said, I am a little bit concerned about how can we handle those users, for example, when they want to change their passwords, because we have a lot of tickets in our help desk for the people that they want to change their passwords, and I don't know how to do it right now because we are going to have these users synchronized to the cloud. We are going to have cloud users. Of course, for the guest users, we cannot handle this because this is going to be handled for the identity provider of the guest user. But for now, how can I do this for my users? Yes, we have a solution. We have a solution for the free version, but this is not going to be good for this scenario right now, because for the free version of the Azure AD, you can change your password. The solution for that calls self-service password reset. So the self-service password reset, you can use it for the free version, but just for changing. Okay, so I have self-service password reset, but just for change the password. What's the difference between reset and change? When I change the password, I know my previous password. When I reset, I don't know it. So for the P1, I have self-service password reset. And of course, I have this for P2, reset as well. All right, Brenda said, very good. So now you are telling me tell me how did this works. We have a portal. We have a special portal for that, and the user is gonna go there and change the password. Okay, but how can they just go there and change the password? I need to challenge them. Yes, you are completely right. We need to challenge them. So you will configure how can you challenge your users to reset the password before reset the password. So you can set up how can you they must receive an email, they must receive a message for SMS, they must receive a challenging questions that you can configure there. So first they need to register for the self-serve password reset, and they need to say from those authentication methods or registration methods, how many they want to use for the authentication method when they need to reset their passwords. All right, so we are going to have a set of challenges there, and that's good. All right, but now I have another concern. We have synchronized users. Those users, they are in the cloud because they have been synchronized from the on-premises environment, as you can see right here. So how can we do this? For those users, they are here and they want to go to this portal that you are saying that their self-serve password reset, and they want to change their passwords or reset their passwords. How this password is going to come back to the on-premises environment, so they will have the same password. Because if I don't have this solution, that's going to be terrible. Yes, we have this one calls write back, password write back. So yeah, with the password write back, every user that reset or change their password using the self-service password reset service, this password is going to be right back to the on-prem environment. All right, good. We can move forward and see that now we have everything that we need to know what is a user and what is a group and how the self-serve password reset works, etc. However, I don't know how to handle, Brenda said, the authorization. We are talking about authentication. This is authentication, and what's the difference? Authentication is when I give the keys of my apartment to you. So you have the my apartment key. But you have no rights to move any chair, any table, any couch, anything. You cannot bring anything. We cannot go out with anything. So this is authorization. So now my users can connect to the Azure AD, but how can I control what my users can do in my tenant? Which users can create another users? Which users can set up the Azure AD Connect? Which users can register applications? Which users can create another tenant? Register a new custom domain, creating groups? So this is authorization. And those authorizations, we have Azure AD roles, all right? So Azure AD roles, they can be built in and they can be custom. Man, for the custom, you can create your own role. Why should we create in our own role? Brenda said. And Bob said, well, you can think about it. The built-in roles, they have a set of authorizations that are already set. So you don't they you if you want to have a role that is specific for some situation and you don't have this as a built-in role, you can create a role for you. Well, we can create a role for us, but this is part of the premium license. All right. So here I have roles for the free, and here I can have custom roles. All right. That's it. They are in JavaScript object notation, and you can create the roles. What are the main roles that you want to know? First, the most powerful built-in role is the global administrator. It's with the global administrator that you can set up, for example, the user synchronizations using the Azure AD Connect. All right? Global admin is the master. You can have a role to help us with our users. For example, you have user admin. You can have security admin. You have many, many, many built-in roles, and you can create your custom roles. Good. Now that we know what we have the roles, you can control, you can see the authorizations. I am concerned because our company has multiple branches around the country. And those multiple branches, we have a branch in Miami, we have another branch in New York, we have another one in Seattle, we have another one in Los Angeles, we have another one in Chicago. And I have some user administrators and I have help desk administrators, for example, for each branch. How can we do this? Because now in the AD, in the Active Directory domain service, we have something called organizational unit. I'm seeing now that in Azure AD, we have a flat structure. So I don't have user, I have just groups. Can I do this with groups? And you said no. No, Brenda, you cannot do this with groups. You cannot assign a user as a administrator for a group. So how can we do this? So you have something called administrative unit. Okay. So with administrative unit is when you can do this. So you will create for example, for the Chicago office, you will create an administrative unit. For this administrative unit, you will put some groups, you can put some users, and also you can put devices. Why not? Hold on, Brenda said. You are saying devices, but I have seen anything about devices in our Azure AD. Oh yeah, Brenda, I forgot to tell you that you can make your devices known by your Azure AD by registering them or join them. So for our users' devices, we can register those devices. And for our users, so this is bring your own device, right? And for company owned devices, we can join them to Azure AD. And so those devices, they are being known by us right now, and we can use this with, for example, Intune. This is a mobile device management. So we can use this to control and make them compliant and check the OS updates, and they must be compliant to use our resources. All right, good. So we can do this. And now when we have an administrative unit with groups, user, and devices, yeah, we can assign people that, for example, just Alex is going to be the user admin, but just for this administrative unit, not in the whole structure. Okay, so this is going to be perfect when you have branches. If you are, for example, a university and you have a lot of campus, so you can just do this with administrative units. All right, okay. Now we need to start setting up things because all the identity environment is ready. Okay, how can we do this? We will start to spin up resources in Azure. So Brenda said, okay, we can start doing this. Let's start bringing out some VMs, some applications. I have some applications here that are not so critical right now, so we can test, we can see how it goes. Okay, but Bob said we need to talk about governance first. So I will explain what is a Azure subscription. How can you have your first VM there? But we need to talk about governance. All right. So what we will see here is that now that we have everything set, we don't have an Azure subscription right now. We just have Azure AD subscription. We don't, or Azure AD instance, Azure AD tenant. We have our licenses, but we have none a single Azure resource. To have a single resource, in my personal opinion, Andres' opinion, is that Azure AD could be called Microsoft Cloud Identity Platform. Okay, we are moving from this to Microsoft Entra. This it, everything is part of Microsoft Entra. So I think we are in the right path, because people normally get confused about Azure Active Directory and Azure resources. So everything is Azure, but now we will start talking about subscriptions when you have resources, pay per use resources. Okay, so once we have your tenant, you need a tenant to have a subscription. To have any Microsoft Cloud product or service, you need to have a tenant first. Okay, Office 365, Dynamics, and of course Azure subscription. So you will still have your Azure AD instance. The Azure AD is going to be the identity platform that will control the subscriptions you have. Let's say that you want to have multiple subscriptions because you have the development, you have the production, you have this divided by departments. So what you can do, and you can create a hierarchy for administration. So what we can do is when we can create something called management group. And for those management groups, actually, we can create 6 um, um, layers of management groups. But now here we're going to just use this example. We have my subscription here. That's going to be my dev subscription, and that's going to be my production subscription. All right. So in this subscription now, I need to create special logical boxes called resource group. those resource groups, they can have my resources. So now here we can have, as we want, a VM. We can have the network. So let me put here network. Now we can have our storage, everything in here. Okay. All right. So how to handle all of these, and how can we need to start talking about these ones? We can have a subscription pay as you go. You can have an enterprise agreement. You can have a CSP contract. You have many ways to have your subscription. Actually, you can have a free subscription as well. So you just go and search for Azure free, and you have that. You can have a $200 subscription for 30 days. You can have more services for in a year, and you can have a service that always free. So now that we know this, how to have some governance on that. That's so important because, for example, those subscriptions, they are connected to this same management group. All right. But you can have other subscriptions that they are in the different management group. We can have subscriptions. We cannot have one subscription inside another subscription. We cannot have a resource group inside another resource group. So we just have this for management groups. All right. And we will use a service called policy. Okay. So the policy determines a behavior of my resources in my management groups or in my subscriptions. How can I do this? For example, I can set up a policy that will allow resources only for East US Azure region. So if I want to spin up this VM must be in the East US region. Actually, I can also say which VM sizes I can have. Or I can say all the VMs, they must be Azure backup. So you can apply this, for example, for your management group, and this is going to be applied for all the subscriptions that I have below. All right. So this is how I manage with policies, and you can manage the behavior. But now that we have resources in Azure, we need to think something. Azure AD roles, they will apply here for my tenant. So people that can create users, remove users, create tenants, groups, everything that we saw. But now we have another roles that you need to be concerned, which is role-based access control, or Azure resources roles. We call this role-based access control. In the role-based access control, you set up some roles that they are also built in or custom. And for all of them, we will have the actions this identity can do, and we can also say not actions explicitly. So we can say, for example, the most powerful one is the owner. And then we have another one called contributor. Just an example. The only difference between owner and contributor is in the not actions from the owner, I have nothing. I have actions, everything, and for the not actions, I have nothing for the owner. For the contributor, I have some not actions. Those not actions, they are about authorization. So the only difference between owner and contributor is that the contributor cannot invite anything or cannot change anything in terms of access. So if I am a contributor, we can say that I was invited to a party. The owner has invited me to this party. I can go to the party, I can drink, I can dance, I can do anything, but I cannot invite anything to the party. All right, or I cannot just go there and change the DJ role. The DJ is the DJ. I cannot change the DJ and ask him to cook, to go to the kitchen. All right, I cannot do that. Or I cannot do this and do that and grab the chef and go there and say, okay, now you are the DJ. I am the contributor. I'm not the owner. All right. So in the not actions from the contributor, I have something related to authorization. Okay. So I need to pay attention on that for the exam. All right. Okay, Brenda said, let's move on. I know how to make some governance. Which other tools we have to interact with Azure, or how can I do this, and how can we start setting up this environment? All right, Brenda, we have many options. First, I need to explain how Azure can create resources. So let's say that here we have our resources that we want to create. Resources. In here, we have how to create them. I know that probably you know the portal, so you can go to the Azure portal and create them. We have also command lines. We have PowerShell and the CLI. We can do this via REST APIs like Terraform, right? But those things, they are not direct connected to the resources. In the middle, we have something called Azure Resource Manager. So the Azure Resource Manager is going to be the owner of this authorization to really create, modify, delete resources. So the Azure Resource Manager is going to be responsible for that. When we are talking about how to create resources, and we can also say that we have something that can be imperative, and another things can be declarative. What is that? I can go to the PowerShell or CLI, for example, and I can just put a command, AZ group create, put a name, put the location, etc. So this is a command that will create a resource group from an imperative mode. But I can do this in a declarative mode. For those ones, I can use templates. Those templates, I can call them the manifest. And I can do this manifest with many resources that I want to create. So actually, Brenda, that's how we will start creating resources. First, we will plan the resources, and after that, we will create them. All right? With a template, with this manifest. All right? So you can do ARM templates, we can do bicep, and we can just make a manifest of everything that we want to create, and we can make a deployment. We can just call those templates and those parameters and create resources. Okay. Another very important thing that we have here in terms of how to manage my resources is that I can protect my resources against mistakes. Let's say that now that you know what is a role, what is the contribution of any role that you can have. So we can have owner, we can have contributors, and you need to pay attention that the contributor, for example, the contributor, if the contributor is assigned to this resource group, so let's say that I have a contributor for this resource group right here. So Alex is a contributor for this resource group, right? So Alex can change any resource in this resource group, a VM, a networking, storage, anything. Delete resources, create another resource. But especially for modify and delete, we have something called resource lock. The resource lock can be delete, delete type, or read only. I mean, even if the user has the authorization to do it, I have a lock to say, no, you cannot do it right now because this resource has a lock. If I have a delete, they cannot delete. If I have a read only, they cannot modify anything. So let's say that my network has some IPs, or my VM is started and I cannot stop it. So this is a read only one. I cannot change any state of my resources, even if I have the rights. Okay, I can go there, not as a contributor, but as an owner. I can go there and delete the lock. But now I know what I'm doing. And I just have a tool to prevent some mistakes. All right. But of course, we must have ways to change or to delete a resource. Good. How can we start? Brenda said. I am convinced. How can we start? All right, Brenda. Very good. Now we need to bring now we need I will be responsible for the identity, but now I need to bring the networking team, because I have seen that the best practice is starting with networking. So how we network in Azure? Okay, so now I can introduce you to Dave. Dave's going to be the networking guy, so Dave can explain to you how is going to be this networking part. All right. Nice to meet you. I'm Dave, and I will explain how Azure networking can help you here. We will start about networking because normally all the resources that we will start is based on virtual machines or things that you need to expose to the internet. So let's think about how the networking part works in Azure. First, we have a representation of our network in Azure, which is a virtual network. We will call this VNet. Those VNets, I need to do some segmentations, because for those VNets, I will have IP ranges. Pause here. Andres, pause. Look, AZ-104, I used to talk this right now because it's very important. AZ-104 is not a fundamental course. It's not a fundamental certification. So you have some prereqs that you need to know, prerequisites. You must know what is a TCP/IP. You must know what is a VPN, or these concepts you must know. When I say IP ranges and you don't know what is that, you are not prepared for the AZ-104. When I say TCP/IP and you don't know what is that, you are not ready for the AZ-104. I must be very straight, very clear to this. When I say VPN and you don't know what a VPN is, you are not ready for the AZ-104. All right? So keep this in mind. Okay? I just want to be 100% honest with all of you. All right. So I have some IP ranges for the VNet. Those IPs, they can be IP version 4, or they can be or they can be IP version 6. I can have at least one IP version 4, and I don't need to have IP version 6, but I can have also both together in the same VNet, right? Okay, let's say that this VNet and this is private IPs. Private IPs means that they cannot be routed by the internet, all right? So let's say this VNet is the 10.1.0.0/16. So those two octets here are going to be for the network, and those two here is going to be for the hosts, all right? But I need to do the segmentation of this VNet. This is what I call subnets, all right? So my subnet here, for example, the subnet 1 must start with 10.1. And after that, I can say, for example, 10.1.1.0/24. So those three octets here are going to be the subnet 1. And I will have more than 200 address available for my machines. So I can have here the subnet 2, and this subnet 2 can be 10.1.2.0, and so on and so forth. All right, so I can have multiple subnets here in my VNet. Okay, okay, understood. All right, how can we start doing things with some virtual machines in those subnets? All right, let's do this. So let's say that you have the subnet 3 right here. The subnet 3 is 10.1.3.0, and you want to have a virtual machine right here. This virtual machine is going to be my website. All right, that what that means, that means that if I have a website, I need some access from the outside. So my user are here, and this user want to go to the website. So I will need a public IP. Okay, this IP is going to come from Azure. You, it's not the case right now, but you can have a bring your own IP option now. But anyway, but just now, just think about a public IP, something that you will create. This is a resource in Azure, so you can create a public IP. You can have your VM right there, and you can just start doing this things. Let's say, let's create our first VM, and let's create some VNets, so we can say we can see these. All right, so let me grab here this screen, and let's go to the private and Azure portal, right? Something going on with my password. All right. Um, no, some problems doing here. That's completely fine. I don't know what's happening, but I have another option. Let's go here. I was using this yesterday. I don't know what's going on. All right, so let's get started with our first virtual machine. So let's create a virtual machine right here. I just go to the virtual machines and create, so we can explain a lot of things about virtual machines. So let's create a new resource group, AZ-104 review. So this is my subscription. As you can see here, I must have a subscription, and I have here a resource group being created right now. Okay, so let's go to create a virtual machine called VM. No, let's call this website 1 East US. This is my VM, and this VM is gonna be Windows Server. All right, East US. We will talk about availability later. So let's say that we will create here this VM as a standard one, and let's put some, reduce this size, put the user, and we'll put password. Okay. Let's go to the disks. We'll talk about disks in a bit, but we need to go to the networking. We're talking about networking. So now the virtual network, we say the VNet, which VNet this machine will be. So I will create a new VNet. For this VNet, I can put a name. I will put like web VNet or services VNet. Services VNet. All right. This one is going to be 10.1.0.0. That's our plan, right? Here in our whiteboard, 10.1.0.0. And I will create one subnet. The web subnet is going to be 10.1.3. All right. So I have the address space here, and I can have the subnet like the web subnet 10.1.3/24. All right. So now I will create this VNet. This is not how we will do during the production environment. We are just doing a demo to Brenda and to Bob about how to create those things and how those things works. Okay. Of course, we have decided that we will use a template for do this. Okay. Now, public IP. Okay. We can have a public IP attached to our virtual machine. That's not the best way to do it. We can use load balancers. Okay, for this demonstration, I will use the public IP for this machine. All right, so I will create a new public IP. This public IP will be web 1 public IP. I will put this basic and okay. All right, I will not use any protection right now. We will see this later. So this is what we need. Okay, we will review and create, and we can create the machine. So our first virtual machine has been is being creating right now. This virtual machine has a public IP, and the private IP will come from the subnet. Okay, so this VM is going to have the private IP and a public IP. How can this? Why I need those private IPs if I have public IP? So my users will access my resource from a public IP. Why do I need this? Well, let's say that of course we don't have just one VNet. We have multiple VNets. And normally we have a hub and spoke architecture when we can have a hub VNet right here. And this VNet can have other resources that we can need. For example, if you want to communicate to the on-prem environment, you will need a VNet gateway. If you want to have security, and I think you want, you can have a virtual appliance right here. And those VNets can be connected. By default, the VNets in Azure, they cannot talk each other. To connect those VNets, you need to create something called VNet peering. So the VNet peering will peer your VNets. The only thing that you need to pay attention is that you cannot overlap IPs. Don't do this. All right. So you cannot connect VNets. For example, if this VNet here is also 10.1.0.0.16, you cannot connect them, right? Because you have the same, or one IP range is inside the other, or is the same in this case. So you cannot have this. All right. Once again, the VNet gateway will connect you to your on-premises environment. We'll talk about this later. Okay. All right. So we have here some kind of um, environment when I have my user accessing the public IP of my machine, but how this machine can communicate to other resources in Azure. So using the private IP. So the private IP from this machine we will use to connect things inside the VNets. When I have a peering, I have also how to communicate with things in other VNets. I can do this using routes. So I have system routes, and I have user-defined routes. For system routes, they are automatically created by Azure. They will be used to connect the virtual machines between subnets, between VNets, always when I have peering, and to connect this machine to the internet. So I don't need to have a public IP, especially for my virtual machine, to allow this machine to connect to the internet. Azure can provide this public IP to connect this machine to the internet. You don't need to expose your machine to the internet. If you want to go out from have a outbound connectivity from your VM to the internet, you don't need a public IP associated to the virtual machine. If I want to have an inbound connection, as our website right now, yes, you need a public IP pointing to your virtual machine. Now we have this connected directly to the virtual machine, but we will see that we can have load balancers. These path to the internet, even if the virtual machine does not have a private IP, is provided by the system routes. But you don't want the system routes controlling some of your resources. So let's say that for the outbound connectivity, for example, you can have here in the subnet 1, you can have another virtual machine, and this virtual machine wants to go out to the internet. You don't want this by system routes. You want to control this, right? So what you can do, you can say, okay, virtual machine, if you want to go to the internet, you can go, but you need to go through a virtual appliance that I have. In this virtual appliance that I have here, I have some rules. Those rules will say if you can go to this destination or not. And to do this, I don't need to, and I can't just delete system routes. I can just create user-defined routes. So those routes, they will be created by route tables. So one example that I can do with this route tables. So those route tables can define my routes, and I need to associate these two subnets. All right. Just remember that the route tables, they are regional, so they must be in the same region of your VNet. And you can establish these rules, and the VM is going to go through these routes that you can establish. Okay. Very good. One other thing that you can do is, for example, when this user wants to go to the website, this user, well, as you can see, we are using public IP. But have you any, by chance, using the IP of the website? So, for example, you want to go to Microsoft.com. You just type Microsoft.com. You don't type the IP, the public IP from Microsoft.com website. Yeah, this is called DNS. domain name system. Okay, and you can have your DNS in Azure for your company's website or for any websites you have. I just forgot my coffee right here. Oh my god! I have some coffee, of course. Coffee first. For the company website, for example, first thing that you do when you want to have a website, you can register a domain, right? You can register your domain. So you go there for your domain registrar and you register a domain. So you have now a registered domain. Okay, and here we need to say which servers will handle the DNS service. So when some people go to the AZ104.com, I want to know when I should go, which public IP I need to reach. So this is the DNS service. In Azure, you can do this. You can delegate this and you can create a DNS zone in Azure, a public DNS zone. Azure will provide the name servers, NS1, NS2, NS3, and NS4. And you can grab those names and you can use them in your domain register. So use delegate the name resolution for your website to Azure. But also you can create private zone. For the private zone, we will do the same thing but inside your VNets. Inside VNets. So for example, this VM right here is VM2 from the subnet 1 VM2. And I have registered a private zone called mylab.lab. And I will create something which is vm2.mylab.lab, and this one will point to the VM private IP. So I have a internal name resolution that I can use for my resources. So I have external name resolution and internal name resolution. All right, good. We have seen that here we have a connection with my on-premises environment with a VNet gateway. What is that and why should we have this thing? Well, when you have a connectivity from Azure to the on-prem, we have two options. You can use the internet or you can use a private circuit. If you are using the internet, you are talking about virtual private networks, VPN, that they are going to use IPsec to connect your devices through a tunnel. So what we will have is a gateway right here, a VNet gateway for now for the VPN, and we will establish a tunnel with your on-premises environment. In your on-premises environment, you will have your VPN device, and of course you have your internal devices. And here you have your machines, right? Okay, so how can you do this? Of course, this is connected. First, for your on-premises environment, you will have a public IP. And you have your private IPs. This is important to know because you cannot overlap those private IPs too. What I mean is that in a hub and spoke topology right here, I will have my virtual machines, my workers. Those virtual machines, they have peering with this other VNet. So here I have a spoke VNet, spoke one, and here I have the hub Azure VNet. So I have a peering right here, and this machine can communicate with the VNet gateway through this peering. I have some configurations that I need to do in the peering. So take a look in the transit. So I can configure here that I want to use a remote gateway. And here I need to allow gateway transit in this side of my peering. All right. So after that, I cannot overlap this private IP right here with this private IP right here because I will have a crash. If this VM here, this worker right here wants to talk with this network right here in the on-prem environment, and they should talk in some cases, of course. That's why we have the VNet gateway configured. All right. The VNet gateway is a resource in Azure that you need to spin up, and the VNet gateway must have a special subnet. The VNet gateway must have a gateway subnet. This must be the name. You cannot have another name. Gateway subnet. All right. We have a special subnet for this guy. All right. And we will recommend you to create this a VNet /27 at least. All right. By the way, in Azure, you cannot create anything above /29. /29 is going to be the maximum segmentation that you can have. You cannot have a /30, 31 or something like this because Azure has some 5 reserved addresses, so you cannot create so small subnets. Okay, so now that we already have our VNet and a subnet, I can start creating my gateway, VNet gateway. This VNet gateway has a lot of SQs in terms of throughput, in terms of how many tunnels we can have, how many users we can connect. So we are talking about a site-to-site VPN right here. Okay, we can also have a point-to-site VPN, which is when my users, they are from home, for example, and they want to connect to Azure using a tunnel. So we have a point-to-site VPN. For the site-to-site VPN, the process is for both actually. Now, for both VPNs, you must create a VNet, a subnet, and you must create a gateway. This gateway must be VPN or for the private circuit. For the private circuit, we call this express route. So let's say right now that Brenda says, no, we don't have a budget for a private circuit right now. We don't have a budget for an MPLS circuit. We must use the internet circuit that we already have in our, let's say this is the headquarters. Okay. So you must use VPN. So this gateway must be set as a VPN gateway. We cannot have the same gateway doing both things. You can choose in the future to have a express route gateway, and yes, you can have the express route gateway in the same gateway subnet. So think about this subnet like this, when you can have a another VNet gateway, but now for express route. Okay. To do this, to have them in the same subnet, you just don't choose the basic VPN gateway. You cannot choose the basic VPN gateway. We have, as I told you, we have many SKUs for these gateways. Don't choose the basic, choose another one. All right. So let's say that we are in the VNet, like creating our VPN right now, and we are okay with the VPN. The VPN gateway has spin up, and we can move forward. We must know the public IP and the private IP from our on-premises environment. And this is when we create something called local network gateway. We can have multiple local network gateway for each VNet gateway we have, because we can have multiple tunnels. Let's say that we have more branches and we want to use those branches with the same VNet gateway in Azure, we can have these ones. We can have up to 100 gateways using this model. 100 tunnels in the same gateway. Okay? Plus the point to site configurations, which is my users connected directly. So in the local network gateway, we have our information from the on-prem environment. We have the public IP and we have the private range that we will use for this. So now the Azure gateway knows in which public IP we must connect and for which virtual net, in which private network we will connect. And after that, you need to configure your on-premises environment and establish another object in Azure called connection. And after that, you can establish your site-to-site VPN connection. All right. For the point-to-site, yes, you can connect. You can use OpenVPN. You can use SSTP. You can check each tunnels you can connect, and you have many authentication types. You can use a certificate, you can use Azure AD connection, you can use even on-premises authentication to authenticate your users to the Azure VPN. All right. Express route, what is that? Express route is different. Express route, we are not using VPN. You are just using a physical circuit. So you will do something like this. You have still have your, of course, your on-premises environment. And you want to connect to Azure, but now we need something. We need low latency. We cannot make a internet routing. We need to go faster. We need to go like we cannot expose anything. Even if you are in a tunnel, my compliance standard requires that I have a private circuit to connect those things. So I have a private circuit. So this is the Azure region. When my resources are. All right. So in this Azure region, I have my VNet, I have my subnet, and of course I have my gateway, which is now express route. And I want to connect this. I want to connect this directly through Microsoft Edge using Microsoft Direct. But most of the cases, we will use a provider. So here we can imagine that we have Microsoft Backbone connected to the region. And here we have points of presence, normally through a ISP. So you will connect to this point of presence. So let's say that you want to use, you are in Atlanta, and for some reason you want to use South Central US region. It's not the closest closest one, but you can do it. All right. And this connectivity from the on-premises environment to the point of presence is what you need. Actually, we need two of them. The service will require redundancy in this one. So this is private connectivity. You are not using internet, and you don't have IPsec for this. You can have a tunnel. You can combine those things, but I invite you to the AZ-700 review that I will do someday. All right. So basically, this is the express route. Okay, let's say that you don't want to use this VNet hub VNet model anymore. Just we have growing up our infrastructure, and we need more robust things to connect everything. Now we have moved forward. Okay, um, hold on, Dave. Brenda said we didn't started yet. We didn't start yet. So how can you are talking about new things if we don't have those things right now? Well, Dave said the reason is that because we need to think in the expansion. So we need to think now, for example, for the IP's configuration, for the IP plan, we need to think how can we expand those things. And I know that we have many branches, we have the headquarters, we have people around the globe, we will have many VNets, we will have our more partners connected with us. So how can we think in the best way to connect those things, and using that model that we have seen from the shared responsibility model, I can give the responsibility for something to the provider, to Azure. So we have a service when you will not use this VNet hub model anymore, but we will use a different model when we still have a hub. We still have a hub here, but this hub right now is not a VNet anymore. It's a service. This service is inside something called virtual WAN. With this service, virtual WAN, we can do something. We can have everything connected to the hub, something like VNets. So I have here the VNet 1, I have here the VNet 2, I have here the VNet 3, but I also have my branch 1. I also have the headquarters. The headquarters is using express route, but the branch is using VPN. It doesn't matter. I can have here, for example, my users using point to site VPN. And also, I can have for the other part of the world, for example, another hub. When I have more branches, etc., etc., and I can connect those ones. Here in this other region, I can have, of course, more VNets connected. I'm telling you, Brenda, if we want to move our whole infrastructure to Azure, we need to be aware that we have a service that can handle this for us. And one important thing that I need to do, I need to talk about this one, is now we don't need to handle many route tables anymore. We don't need to handle many subnets anymore. We don't need to handle the public IPs from our VNet gateways. We can just configure them. And one more thing, in this model right here, it's very difficult to have, for example, a full mesh configuration. What is that? If I have here, I have multiple VNets, as you can see. So here I have the spoke one, now we have the spoke two with more virtual machines. The communication between spoke one and spoke two is not allowed right now because the peering that we have is from spoke one to hub and spoke two also to the VNet hub. And this is the peering is not transitive. So we need to configure something. We need to or configure another peering, and we can have another many peerings to do if we have a full mesh configuration. What is a full mesh configuration? I want everybody talking to everybody. So I want to VNet one talking to VNet two. I can do this through the hub. This is a standard configuration. So we can have this full mesh configured. And of course, I can block those things. I can use some custom configurations as well with custom routes inside the virtual WAN. All right, all right. I think networking is the biggest part here of this course, but let's switch gears to talk about the load balancers. All right. Okay, we are thinking in move our first website to Azure, and I don't want to expose this virtual machine directly to the internet. I want to use a tool to do that. How can I do this? Well, I can go there and I can create a load balancer. I have types of load balancers. I have some load balancers that they are global, and I have another one that they are regional. What is that? I can balance, I can spread my resources um, between regions. That's going to be global, or I can use my resources in the same region. And I have layer 7 load balancers and layer 4 load balancers, which is a HTTPS load balancers, HTTP or HTTPS load balancers, and those one they are not HTTP and HTTPS. So let's say that they are TCP and UDP load balancers. Okay, so what we have here for the global layer 7, we have front door. For the regional layer 7, we have application gateway. For the global layer 4, we have traffic manager. And for the regional layer 4, we have Azure Load Balancer. For the AZ-104, we don't talk about global load balancers, okay? But the traffic manager is just the DNS. We can talk about this later. And the front door is going to be the HTTP spreading between regions. Let's start talking about the Azure Load Balancer. So Azure Load Balancer. You have your user right here. This user is trying to reach your application. Now you can have your application in multiple VMs. And you can have a load balancer right here, which is Azure Load Balancer, and you can spread this connectivity among them. You can have a public load balancer, or you can have a internal load balancer. Both are Azure load balancers, but the front end of this one right here is a internal IP. And for example, here I can have two VMs responsible for database. All right. Just remember Azure load balancer, VMs, or VM scale sets we can have in the backend pool. All right. This load balancer can have a session persistence, which is based on the IP or IP plus protocol of my customer. I can make the, for example, this user made a request. This request was answered by the VM here, number one. So for during all the session, only the VM number one will answer to this guy. This is a session persistence, okay? Based on layer 4. All right. What else? We can have basic and standard load balancers. For the basic, I can have up to 300 VMs. For the standard, I can have up to 1,000 VMs. All right. For those load balancers, I can also have network address translation, which is I have destination network address translation that I can set up a backend or a VM to answer to a specific port and protocol. So when my request comes to the front end, the Azure Load Balancer can analyze these rules. And I can have source network address translation, which is I will use the IP from the load balancer and if my VMs needs to do a external request. So I can use this IP from my load balancer. Okay. The Azure Load Balancer, it has some limitation, but it's also very, very useful in some cases when you have TCP, UDP applications that they are not using any type of, or not, you are not using HTTPS rules. You cannot balance this one based on the path. You cannot do anything like this because you are going to use application gateway to do this. For the Azure Load Balancer, you can have multiple public IPs, so you can have multiple front ends, one or more than one, and you can do your rules based on port, protocol, source, and destination. All right, so you can do your rules related to this. Pay attention on the public IP. The public IP also has a standard one and basic one, and this SQ must match with your Azure Load Balancer. So if they ask you which public IPs you can use for this load balancer, the IP must be in the same region and with the same SQ, public or basic. So you cannot use a standard load balancer with a basic public IP. Another thing about the load balancer is the availability zones. So you know that Azure region, we are talking about regional resources right here, but inside the region, I have availability zones. For the standard load balancer, you can have availability zone support. What that means that your load balancer will be present in all the region. So your load balancer, if this load balancer is standard, I can create this load balancer in, of course, I need to pick a region, and this load balancer will be present in all availability zones. You will see just one, but just in case you have any issue, or we have as a Microsoft any issue with one availability zone, your load balancer will still work. But if you don't have these availability zones configured, you can have your service outage based on just one data center outage. So if you want to have more availability, we recommend you to have the availability zone for the load balancer configured. This is only available for the standard one. Okay. But now you need more things. You are not talking about TCP or UDP applications. We are talking about web applications, HTTP applications. We want to use security. We want more. And now we don't have just virtual machines. We can connect these to our own premises environment, for example, to other services in other clouds, etc., etc. So we need to have a application gateway in this case. For the application gateway, first difference, when my users come to my app, I have something called, this is optional but strongly recommended, web application firewall. Web application firewall will protect me against layer 7 attacks based on the open worldwide application security project, OWASP, top 10 vulnerabilities. So this organization, they release the top 10 vulnerabilities in the market for the layer 7 attacks, and you have the web application firewall here plugged in your application gateway, doing the first layer security for you. All right. After that, of course, we are connecting to a public IP in this case, and you can also have the application gateway internally. Okay, you can have a like a second layer of your application that also requires a HTTP, or you can have um, um, normally that's not the case, but normally when we have internal applications, those applications they can be connected to the application gateway. Actually, the application gateway can have both front ends at the same time. So I can have a public front end right here, and I can have an internal front end right here, especially for my things that come from my VNets. So they will connect, use my internal front end, and things that are coming from the internet, we will have this connected to the public front end. And here now I cannot have just VMs. Of course, I can have VMs and VM scale sets. Sorry. But I can also have a connection with my on-prem environment. I can also have this in my backend. I can have an app as a platform. We will see this in a bit. Basically, in the backend pool of a application gateway, you can have anything that you can reach by an IP. Okay, so you can have a lot of things behind this. Important thing, we can use HTTPS. When I call HTTPS, I call security, I call security sockets layer, right? And transportation. Yes, we can have certificates. Certificates can be applied to my application gateway. And the application gateway can do the SSL offload. That means that my server, in the end, is not responsible, cannot be responsible anymore, or should not be responsible anymore for the encryption and decryption. So the application gateway will do this for me. So from my application gateway to my backend instance, that's going to be clear, and the application gateway will be responsible for encrypt everything and decrypt everything that comes from my user. All right. I can have this with WAF or not. I can have auto scale or not. That's why we have SQs for the application gateway as well. I have the standard and I have the V2. And you can add here WAF for both. If I have the V2, the advantage that I have here first is auto scale. Okay. For the standard, I have sizes, small, medium, and large. And I can manually have more instances of my app gateway. When I say more instances, we will see just one, but in terms of throughput and the amount of connections that I'm having, I can increase my availability with that, or my scalability. Manually with the standard, if I have to choose, I have to pick a size when I'm creating my app gateway, small, medium, or large. For the V2, I don't have this. I just say how many instances I want, and how many instances maximum I want and minimum. So based on the signals, based on the capacity, and on the needs that I have, the app gateway can scale automatically, scale up and scale down. All right. More than that, I have many differences between how can I make my rules. First of all, this guy has some um, um, features. The first one that we see is the listener. The listener will listen the port. After that, we will have the rules. For the rules here, we have the main differences. First, let's talk about the listener a little bit first. The listener can be basic or can be multi-site. For the load balancer, you can have multiple front end. We can have multiple front ends, multiple public IPs. For the application gateway, you can just have one IP or of each one public and one internal maximum. So that's why we have a multi-site configuration. With the same IP, you can have multiple websites. So based on your domain and the fully qualified domain name, you can balance. So I can have az700.com and az104.com using the same application gateway. Okay? And after that, you can go to the rules. And the rules, we have different things as well. First, we have path-based routing or path-based balancing. What is that? Here, I have my backend, right? Which is my resources that they will answer to the request. I can have different backends for different paths in my domain. Let's say az104.com / app1 must go to the backend 1, but az104.com / app2 must go to the backend 2. So you can do this based on the HTTP request. Okay. You have seen that for the load balancer, we have session persistence. When one instance can answer the request from these users, some applications need to do this. And of course, for the application gateway we have the session persistence actually based on cookie. So we have something called cookie affinity. And also we have another thing very important, which is connection draining. The connection draining will allow you to gently, smoothly remove your connections from your application gateway by not accepting new connections. So if you want to go in any maintenance and or something like that, and or updates, you can just not accept not new connections from this app gateway, and you can just smoothly don't have more users connected, and you can turn off your backend instance to make what you need to do, what you need to do. Okay. All right, in the listener is where we will have our certificates. So remember that our certificate's going to be here, right? We can have more, of course, more functionalities, but just for the AZ-104 review, I think this is quite enough. Okay. Let's say that now that we know how to balance those things, we need to know how to have availability of my resources that will be behind my load balancers. All right. So to do this, we need to understand first what compute resources options we have in Azure. Okay. So let's talk about compute options. I told you that's would be a long video, so we are almost 2 hours connected right now. Networking is really hard. Yes, Fernando. Networking is really, really hard. I know it. But we will talk about a little bit more about networking, but anyway, just to let you know about compute options. First, we have infrastructure as a service and we have platform as a service options. For the compute here, we have virtual machines and we have scale sets. In here for as platform, we have app services for the AZ-104, okay? App services, we have containers, and we have Kubernetes. Let's talk about VMs first. What is a VM? Well, in a VM, of course, we have a hardware managed by Azure, okay? So we have here the hardware part. Let me put this inside. Okay, all right. After this hardware is going to have the operating system. We will have some virtualization. And here you have your VMs with their own OS, and you can administer these VMs completely independently of the host, right? So let's say that for the same host OS doing this virtualization, you have your you don't care about it. Okay, this is Microsoft managed. But for the VM, for the OS of your VM, for all the aspects from your VM, this is a customer managed. So you must pick your OS, could be Linux or could be Windows. Free versions of Linux, paid versions of Linux, client versions of Windows, server versions of Windows. All right. If you have a VM with Windows, you cannot change the Windows version of this VM. Okay. You cannot change the version of this. You have Windows 2019 server. You cannot change this for Windows 2022, Windows Server 2022. You need to redeploy. You need to make another VM. For Linux, yes, you can. Okay, your VM has also some storage connected. Okay, for this storage, you have disks. Those disks can be standard one, HDD, or they can be premium one, solid state, SSD. Depending on the IOPS throughput and capacity that you need for these disks, you need to pick one. Sometimes you will pick a bigger disk that you don't need this amount of gigabytes available to you just because you need some more IOPS and throughput. There's a difference between IOPS and throughput, of course, but just to let you know that sometimes you need to pick a different disk just because the IOPS. And also we have something in some VMs called ultra disks. When you want even higher IOPS and throughput, and so you can plug ultra disks. For a VM, you can have at least you must have one disk, which is the operating system disk, and you can attach. So first you have the OS disk, and you can attach data disks. The amount of disks that you will have depending on the VM SKU or VM size. So we have multiple types of VMs. So for example, you have the D series. They are the general purpose. So when you don't have any special things that you need to have, so you can just use D series. Okay, so you can have VMs that they are storage optimized. You can have VMs with a memory of optimized. We can have CPU optimized. Sometimes it's difficult to write here optimized. Yeah. All right. Okay, so I have a question here from Daniel. Hey, Daniel, how are you doing? Yeah, Daniel has a course with me a couple of weeks ago. Access key to Azure AD user account and demo access and storage by using Azure AD instead of access key. We don't have time to do this right now, Daniel, during this review, but yeah, it's a good idea to have a video here talking about this. So stay tuned. I will have these notes here from the live session, and I can if and also for all of you, if you have any suggestion for other videos, that things that you want to know, let me know here. Put into the chat. I want to know a demo about Azure File Sync. I want to have a demo about anything. So just put here. Yeah. No, no, no problem, Daniel. Daniel saying that's missing something, but no problem. It's going to be recorded. It's going to be available to you in the YouTube. No problem. Yeah, and you can share, etc. And but by the way, if this content is already have made some difference to you, just like and subscribe and share. This content is going to be good for spread the channel. Yeah. Thank you very much. All right. So those VMs, now we know how the VMs work. We know what is a VM and the types of VMs that I have, how to scale them, how to have the scalability of those VMs. So those VMs, they can have something like scale sets and availability, of course. Let's move here to the portal. Let's go and try to create another VM just to see the options we have. Okay. So here we have availability options. Once again, here, availability zones, and here we have availability options. Let's see what we have. For availability options, we have availability zone, we have a scale set, and we have availability set. Let's see how can we do this. How can we explain this? Okay. Let's start first. Let's talk about availability first, and after that we can talk about scale. All right. Let's say now you know what is a availability zone, which is a Azure data center. So this is a availability zone, a data center. In this Azure data center, we have different racks, physical racks, right? For those racks, we have hosts, and in these hosts, we will create your VMs when you want. So when you are creating your VMs, in some place, somewhere, we have some lights blinking there and creating things. All right, for real. Okay. Let's say that now that you know that you can have multiple VMs for the same service, you want to create them. So you want to create 3 VMs for your web service. All right. And you did not specify anything. So Azure has created this in the same rack, in the same data center. This rack itself, we call fault domain. And why? Just because we have here the networking source, the power source for each of those racks, which is a single point of failure. In this case, my three VMs from my web server, they are running the same fault domain. But we have another problem here. We have another thing. Those things, they are related about downtime and they are related about maintenance. And we can have some updates that we need to do, which will generate another thing that we call update domain. So one thing that I don't want is that those VMs, they are being in a host and this host is updating at the same time. Or if I have a problem with this fault domain, all my VMs from the web, they are be compromised. So I don't want this. So I need to create a availability set. Oh gosh. In availability set, I need to create the availability set and I need to set this VM for the availability set in the moment of the creation. Okay? In the moment of the creation, right? So what I what the availability sets do it will do for me. This virtual machine right here, it will be automatically put in one place and the other one is going to be in the other place, other fault domain and other update domain. So let's say that here I have my update domains. So DVM1, 2, and 3, they will never be in the same fault domain and they will never be being updated at the same time with the availability set. But I want to increase my SLA. The SLA for this is 99.95. To increase this, I want to have multiple data centers, which is availability zone. Yeah, it's not possible to change the availability set after the creation. No, it's not possible. You must do this in the moment of the creation, and this is permanent for the VM. Okay, so here you have in this region other two availability zones. In these availability zones, we have the same thing. We have racks. In those racks, we will use something called availability zone option for my machines. When I do with availability zones, I need to pick a zone when I'm creating my machine. So I will create this machine in zone 1, the other one is on 2, the other one is on 3. Okay? If I want to create this machine in both zones, I will be creating 3 virtual machines. As you can see here, 3 virtual machines will be created with the names shown above. I can do this. I can create an availability zone right now with the names that I will put here, or I can edit the names, of course. I can edit the name from the VM1, VM2, and VM3. We'll be creating 3 VMs. Those VMs can be responsible for one workload, and we will put this in a three in different zones. Okay. Based on the zone selection, we will place three virtual machines, one in each selected zone. You may want to create this resource as a virtual machine scale set instead, which allows you to manage, configure, and scale load balanced virtual machines. Look at that. Now we are talking about scaling. So Azure Portal is saying, probably the scale set is going to be good for you because we can handle even this availability and the scalability of your machines. Think about it. So Azure will provide how can we manage two things at the same time? So if I want to do this, I can think about scaling. And by the way, the availability zone is going to bring me 99.99% SLA, because my virtual machines now is they will be like not in the same data center. They will be in the other data center right here. The VM2 will be here. So Azure will bring my VM2 to this rack and the VM3 to this one in other data center. So that's what we have right now. Of course, those data centers, they are connected, and we don't have, of course, the same update domain we don't have for these machines. All right. So we will distribute them. Yeah. So we will see that we will have availability set option. So we can create a virtual machine scale set that will let us to manage a group of load balanced VMs. The number of VMs instance can be automatically increased or decreased. First, how can we increase and decrease things for the VM? So we need to step back a little bit and talk about scaling. Now we talk about availability, let's talk about scaling. I have here my VM, and this VM is 4 CPU and 8 giga RAM. Single VM. All right. I don't want, this is not enough for me anymore. So I need to scale. My decision was increase the size of the VM. I can do this. So vertical scaling. And to do this, I just changed the VM size to a VM with 8 CPU and 16 RAM. Yeah, this is normally it's a manual operation. I just go there and change the VM size. If you go to the VMs that we have here, we can see, for example, this one that we have just created. We have here something called size. And you can just go here. This VM now can be changed. So I want to change this for 4 CPU and 16 giga RAM, resize in virtual machine. So I'm resizing my VM. I'm scaling up. All right. But if I want to use a horizontal scaling, I want to use scale sets. So instead of creating 3 VMs using the availability zones, I can create a scale set and let Azure handle this for me. So what I'm going to do, we will create a single scale set. This scale set can be rules like the minimum amount of VMs, like 1, the maximum amount of VMs, like 10, and I can configure rules based on signals that my VM has. Example, CPU percentage. So Azure will monitor this VM, and I will say when this VM reach like 80% CPU for 10 minutes average, you will create, for example, 2 more VMs. So, and after that, I will set up a cool down rule saying, okay, now that you have spin up, wait like 15 minutes until you check again. Okay. If you check again and those 3 VMs, and now I have 3, they have 80% utilization,
you can create another two. And of course, you need to set up the scale in rule. When I have like 20% CPU, we will reduce my VMs, but one by one. And the same thing, cool down after this. I can set this also based on some events. I can set that based on a schedule for this. For example, I want this rule just for Mondays. And but I want to set this, for example, for the next April 7th, which is my birthday, to scale to 10 instances. Because this day I have something. It's a special day. I have something that a lot of people will go to my website or something like that. Let's think about Black Friday, for example, that we know exactly the date. We don't need to wait until the signals, because that's going to take seconds or minutes to scale, but we can go there and do this by ourselves. Okay, and that's going to be ready for us. When I create my VMs, I have something that I can do as a post deployment. This is extensions. So I can have my own script. I can have a custom script. But after my VM is created, I can set up some scripts to be executed. I can install things. I can install, for example, not custom but built-in extensions for Linux or for Windows to install anti-malware, to install the connection for from Azure AD for my virtual machines, to have some third-party monitoring like a Dynatrace agent, like a Network Watcher agent, which is Azure one. So we can set up these extensions. Okay, okay. This is VM and VM scale sets, infrastructure as a service. Let's talk about platform as a service right now. You don't want to use VMs anymore. We just want to move forward because I don't want to update the operating system. I don't want to be responsible for all those things that you have talked right now. What we can do, we can share responsibility and we can use platform as a service. First thing you need to do is a app service plan. What is an app service plan? Well, app service plan is a VM or VMs managed by Azure. With this app service plan, I can create my app services. Think about a VM. You have a VM, and with this VM, you can host your app or your apps. So I can have multiple apps in one VM. Same thing with the app service plan. For the app service plan, I need to pick the size or the SKU. So I will have the comparison between a VM and an app service in terms of CPU and RAM and capabilities. And also with the size, will include the storage amount that you have with the plan that you choose. We have free one, we have the shared one, basic one, standard one, premium one, and isolated one. So for those, we have different capabilities. For example, we don't have any kind of scale for the app service plan if we want the free version. And for some of them, we have scale, but is manually up to 3 instances. But if you have more standard premium or isolated, you can use auto scaling. So you can use the same functionality that we have seen for the VMs right now with the app service plan. But remember, the things that we need to set here, this is in the app service plan. We not scale the app services itself, the app. We will scale the compute infrastructure responsible for this app, which is the app service plan. Here you can set up from your plan if you want to use custom domains, if you want to use a deployment slots. What is deployment slots? Deployment slots, they are staging options for your app. You can create another version. This version can be in a deployment slots. So depending on your plan, you can have up to 20 deployment slots. So you can have multiple versions, and you can just make this a quality assurance environment. And after that, you can just swap this staging to production. And the production is going to be your last known stable app version. On top of the app service plan, you have your app services. So let's switch to the portal to see this, how it works. So let's go to the app services plans. I can have multiple app services plans as well as I can have multiple VMs. Okay, the app service plan represent the collection of physical resources used to host your apps, like location, scale, size, and SQ. Okay, so let's create our first one. In here, we will put a name for the app service plan. So my first app services plan. I need to pick an operating system the same way I do with my VM. We are creating a VM here, but we will not manage this VM, but we are creating a VM. Okay, so I'll put like Windows. I need to pick a region. The region here is going to be important because OS and region. Here, my apps must use or must be in the same region and OS of my app service plan, of course. Okay, so sometimes when we are trying to create a app service and we cannot see the plan, is just because they are not compatible. One more thing that you need to pick here for your app service plan is the redundancy. Okay, app service plan can be deployed in a zone redundant, but you need to pick the plan first. All right. Okay, so region East US, let's say explore pricing plans. So we have the hardware view and the feature view. So if you are more interested in which features this app must have, so you just change to feature view. Auto scaling, for example, if this is a must to you, you just change to feature view, and you can see here that which plans you will have with auto scaling. As you can see, we can have manual scaling here for this. We can have many basic plans, many standard plans, premium versions, free versions. So we have this here, okay? And you need to have backups, staging slots, as you call deployment slots or staging slots. If those one can be zone redundant, that's the reason why I don't have there the options to enable zone redundant, because zone redundancy is just available for premium app service plan. All right, and the cost as well. So here we have popular options, dev test options, production options, and we can see here all the options we have. All right, so let's say that I want to create a popular option called standard S1. This is gonna have backups, I can have rules for the auto scaling, and I can have 10 daily backups and 5 staging slots. I will select this one. I don't have zone redundancy enabled for this one. Okay, but I can do it. So I will review and create. And we will create a VM with a Windows environment, Windows operating system in a um, standard SKU small, which has the equivalent of 1.75 CPU. So here also we need to pick redundancy. For the app services, we need to use the same region, and here we will also need to pick the framework we are going to use. Let's see this. We can have multiple ways to do it. Okay, go to resource. So this is my plan. I can have here the scale up or scale out, which is different things, the same of my VMs. Scale up, I will change my plan. So I change to another plan. As the same thing that I changed the VM size. I have scale out when I have the rules that I will use, or I can use this manually. I can just move this bar right here and creating more app service plan, or I can do this rules based. Okay, I need to check automatically scaling enable, so I need to manage the rules based on my scaling. So I need to configure this first. Now is manual. I can put this custom auto scale, and I need to configure the condition that I have here. After that, I can start creating my app services. So on top of this plan, I don't have any app service. I can go here and create a new app service. I can put the name AZ-104 review, and Azure will create for me a domain, Azure 104 review.azurewebsites.net. If I want to use custom domain, I need to pay attention which plan I picked for this one. As you can see here, when I try to make things right and put AZ-104 review, the app name is not available because has been already taken for other person. So this name must be globally unique because we will create a website for you. So AZ-104 review 777, just because I like the number 7. And I need to see the runtime stack and how I will publish this this web app. So I'm creating in a web app. Okay. So if I go here and I say that I want to create this as a .NET 6, I will use East US. So now I can use my first app service plan that I have created earlier. But if I change this to Linux, even if my East US region is the same, I cannot do this because my virtual machine that will support is a Windows one. So I can create this using um, the same plan that we have created. Is loading. I don't know why it's taking a while to do this. All right, is here. All right, so now I can create my plan or my web app, sorry, in my plan. So the app service plan is here. I have some things about it and about my web app as well. So after this web app is ready, I can tell people from development, look, the web app is ready. You can deploy the app using GitHub or using Visual Studio Code, or whatever, FTP. or things that you want to put our web app online with the content that we need. Okay, we have more. After this app service plan, we need to talk about containers. So the containers, they will be different in terms of which infrastructure we have. Because now, from the containers, we will still have a hardware, we will still have a host operating system, but now we are having something here different. For Azure platform as a service, we will have Docker. On top of Docker, we will have our containers. So as we don't have a full operating system right here in terms of isolation, the container will be less isolated than a VM because they are sharing the same OS kernel. The containers, they are like a folder, but this folder thinks like a VM. In here, we have the binaries and the libraries only for the task this container were assigned for. We don't have a full operating system. Okay, that means that sometimes I can have more containers than VMs in the same hardware capacity. We can scale better. We can do things in a different approach. Sometimes is the solution, sometimes not. But the containers in Azure can be handled by many solutions. You can have a virtual machine, and in this virtual machine you can have your own container environment as an infrastructure as a service. No problem, you can install things there. The VM is up to you. You can have your Linux VMs, Windows VMs, and put any Docker runtime you want, and sorry, any container runtime you want, not just Docker. All right, but if you want to use platform as a service, the service that we will offer, they are like this. Let's think about a developer. So this is Daniel, my developer. Daniel is doing a containerized app. Daniel will use something like Dockerfile to build something called container image. This container image, I can use some Azure service to store them as a registry. And this, you will push the image to a container registry. Could be Docker Hub, could be on-prem, could be anyone, but in Azure we have Azure Container Registry. This action right here is connected to role-based access control. So I can see if Daniel has the role to do this in this specific registry. So I can start the control right here. All right. After that, I need to pull this image and run this image. To run this image in Azure, I will have something called Azure Container Instance. I mean, you can have a virtual machine pulling your images to run your containers, but you can have a platform as a service option here, which is Azure Container Instance. So you can deploy directly to this um, um, environment. So let's say that we have containers right here. So we can have container instances. All right. For the container instances, we can create. This is for small environments. When I have single containers or just a few containers, like a container group, I can create a container group with just a few containers, because the orchestration is going to be mine. All right. So I can offer this Azure Container Instance to quick and easily run containers on Azure without managing services. Okay. So we can create this right here, and we will see the container name. If we have the SQ right here, and from each image source, we will have. So we can have Azure Container Registry. We can have Quick Start Images, which is from Microsoft Container Registry, or we can have other registry and just put the link for the image, which is public or private. So we're going to put something here. We can use any registry we want. If you go for the quick images, you can select one of those quick images. For example, right here, we have a static website, hello world, or we can have like a Linux web server, or we can have like a container for a database answered on specific port. But just remember, if you have a container, we will expose a single port for this container. Even if you have a container group, we will expose just a single port of this container group. So, but you can have a group of containers doing different tasks using Azure Container Instances. All right, we can have this in platform as a service. So this is going to be how can we do it. More than that, we need to talk about orchestration. So when you move to multiple containers, when you move of multiple things that you can do, we need to talk about Kubernetes. Now, what we will have is multiple containers, but we have something that is Microsoft managed and customer managed. So Microsoft will manage your orchestrator itself, which is the API server, the scheduler, the database with your configurations, the controller. Everything's going to be managed by Microsoft. So when you try to connect to your environment, you will use, of course, your credentials. So here we have our friend Azure AD. And if you have your credentials to connect the app with the API server, you have how to go to the customer manage part. In this customer manage part, you will use the kubectl to communicate, or with the kubelet, and you can communicate with your nodes. And guess what? What is a node? And a node is a VM. Same thing. But you are using platform as a service. So that's okay. But just let you know that this is a VM. Of course, for the node, you have scale options as well. But where are my containers? My containers, they are inside the nodes in something called pod. In here, you have your containers. Here we have a node pool. So we have a pool of nodes, of course, that they can communicate themselves using kube proxy. So you have your cluster. For this cluster, you can scale the pods, or you can scale the nodes, or even you can use Azure Container Instances to scale some nodes, like virtual nodes. So take a look on this in the documentation. It's a lot of things. I told you that it's not the AZ-104 full course. It's just a review. In terms of storage, you can use persistent storage for a node using disks. We recommend SSD, but you can use standard ones as well. And you can use Azure files. When you want to share storage among your nodes or between nodes, you can use Azure files. For a single node access, you use disks. For shared, you use the Azure files option. All right, so Kubernetes is all about orchestration. In Azure, this is called Azure Kubernetes Services, AKS. This Microsoft managed site is cost free, and the customer managed is where you will be charged for it, right? We talk about storage right here, but how storage can be managed in Azure. So let's talk about storage. It's not compute anymore. Storage. Well, you can have a storage account. Of course, we have been talking about disks. Of course, as part of the storage, managed disks will be managed by Microsoft, but they are like VHD, like virtual hard drives, that the abstraction of a disk. So in storage, of course, we have disks. We have more service like containers. We have queue. We have tables, and we have files. In the containers, we have our blob services. For the blob services, we need to divide in block blobs, page blob, and append blob. Block blobs, media files. Page blob, VHD. Append blob, logs. All right? So anything you want to share with, for example, you have a website and this website is going to use images, videos, etc. You will put this in a blob. You want to create your own VHD files, and actually Azure, you're going to use page blobs to manage your managed disks. And this is for a random, this is for a random access. So that's what we need for disks. And the logs, they will append information. All right. How can I use queues? Some applications, they need to communicate themselves and they need to communicate with other services with messages. So queue is going to be for messages. Normally, this is first in, first out, but we cannot guarantee. To guarantee the first in, first out, you must use the service bus, which is another service in Azure to make queues, but you can communicate messages, small messages between applications. Tables for NoSQL data. So we have structured data, semi-structured data, and unstructured data. So we have unstructured data from the containers in the blobs. So they are unstructured data. We have structured data in our databases, and we have tables for NoSQL or semi-structured databases, something like XML or JSON is kind of a light schema. So we don't have those fixed schema like a SQL database with columns and rows and they are specific for something. No, here we have entities. Okay, So this they are like a value pair. So they are like entities, and we can use this for many NoSQL storage. And files they are a bit special, so that's why I put this here. For the files, we are using SMB, service message block here, just to make things available like virtual drives, for example, when using Kubernetes nodes, or you can map this to your users and you can have file shares. So here we're talking about file shares. When you create a service in Azure storage account for files, you can create file shares and share files from there. So you can have, for example, your file servers into the cloud. Actually, we have a special service for this. You can create shares and just let them be available to cloud endpoints, so people can just map them in your machines around the globe, just mapping this share. So we can use Azure authentication, or you can use keys authentication, and you can do this with your file shares. So the file sync service, the file sync services is using the files in Azure, the service. So here I have my files, my file service in Azure, in my storage account, of course, and I can have my servers on-prem with an agent from file sync, from Azure file sync. So they will sync to the Azure file server. So I have here this endpoint right here synchronizing to Azure files. And I can choose, for example, the experience from my users. They will, for example, keep some files right here in the on-premises. And for any things that change from these files, the file sync will synchronize to the file to the Azure. So I have a second option. I have a disaster recovery options. Or I can use this file server as a backup, this file service as a backup, using configuring the agent for this. But this can be transparent for my for my user. My user does not know if the file are coming to the cloud or is on premises already. If my user wants to access some file that is not here on-prem, they will bring the file right away from the Azure file services. So if you want to reduce the amount of download that you have from your file server, so you can keep some files that are normally they are frequently accessed by my user, you can use this here. Okay. By the way, of course, we have more options for the blob. For my blob services, you can also have this. You can have tiers for my data. For Azure files, we can have hot tier and cold tier, which is the the access to my data is going to be more expensive, but the store is going to be less expensive, but be cheaper. So I can set up for my blobs, I can set up the life cycle management. All right. In the life cycle management, I can set up rules that will move from the hot tier to the cool tier to the archive tier. So this one is going to be mm, very cheap to access in the hot area because I'm considering that I need this file all the time, but it's going to be much more expensive to store. In the archive, for example, it's going to be very cheap to store, but it's going to be expensive to access and is not online. So you need to hit how do I say this? Hydrate the the data to bring it up. So it can take hours to have my data available. And this is my data that I have often access. And the cool one's gonna be in the middle. So I can set up some rules to have not so expensive to store or a not so expensive to access. But keep in mind that if my access is often used, I must keep this in a hot tier. All right. Okay. Now we need to talk about a backup. How do I do backup in Azure? Well, I have some services. So you can use third party in Azure, but if you want to use Azure native solutions, you can use like this. You have backup for your VMs in Azure, also to your file shares. So both they are in Azure. I need to set up a vault. Okay, just for backup, I can set up a backup vault. However, I have some limitations with a backup vault, so I can set up a recovery services vault. Okay. So when I have my recovery service vault for Azure, will automatically install the agent in this machine and also set up the rule for this file share, and the vault must be policies. This policy will set up the retention, will set up the frequency when I will do and when I will do my backup, and the snapshots for my virtual machines. The snapshot from the virtual machine will keep this backup in a disk up to 5 days, and I can recover my virtual machine faster from this period of time. So this is going to be app aware for my virtual machine, so I can restore my virtual machine exactly as it was. So this is how you can do things in Azure, but you cannot just do things in Azure. You can do this on premises as well. So for the on-prem, you can have, for example, your machines right there, and you can connect those virtual machines, but we have different statements here. Here I have something called Microsoft Azure Recover Services. This is an agent software that is responsible for files and folders backup. I can connect here using some Vault credentials. I don't need VPN. I can download these credentials from the Vault, and I can use them to register a server or a client that is being connected to the Vault. This is just for Windows. even server or client. And as you can see, it's not app aware, it's just files and folders. The other option that I have is using something called maps, Microsoft Backup Server. And this is app aware. And also for Linux or Windows. Okay? And I can use, by the way, System Center Data Protection Manager instead of maps. That's my third option. Okay? What I can do, the difference here is that with maps, I can connect this with credentials also direct to the vault. And I have my backups there. But I have another solution, which is connecting all of these with backup server or System Center DPM, Data Protection Manager, and this backup file. Once this is a backup file, I can use a Windows Server machine as a point of concentrate my backup files, and I can use Mars to connect to the vault, for example. So from the System Center Data Protection Manager, I can create a file that is my backup. And this file is going to be here, and I can synchronize with the vault. All right? We can also use the recovery service vault for disaster recovery. That's another function of the recovery service vault. When I activate the Azure Site Recovery for some VM, I need to specify the vault that I will use, the recovery service vault. And for this recovery service vault, I have some things that I need to set up for which secondary region I want to have a site recovery. But in this secondary region, I will have no virtual machine at all right now. All the data is going to be cached in the secondary region. And I will use this to spin up a new VM in case of failover. So if I have any problems right here, my data is synchronized, so I can use the same data once it's app aware to spin up another VM. I can use this for the same thing. I can use this for the on-premises. So I can have the on-premises as my primary environment. I can have some agents there. And just in case of failure, I can spin up this to our Azure region. All right? All right, let's see the last subject of this review. We are almost 3 hours connected. So let's see monitoring. So the primary thing that we think is Azure Monitor, yeah, but we have other things. So we have logs and we have metrics. Metrics, I will do this with Metrics Explorer. Metrics Explorer. But logs, I have different logs. I have some logs that I can check through activity log, for example. Activity log is everything that happened with your environment. But I have log analytics. Remember, log analytics, I need to go to my resource and set up in diagnostic settings what I want to do. And after that, I can use queries with custom query language to bring a deeper analysis from my resources. Okay? But for do this, I need to have a repository, which is my log analytics workspace. Workspace. In the diagnostic settings, that's not the only option I have. I can send my logs to a storage. I can send to a event hub, even to partner solutions. All right. So think about activity log is the workbook of the Azure Resource Manager. It takes notes of everything in the activity log. The log analytics is when I can move things to the log to the diagnostic settings, so that the diagnostic settings must be available to use custom query language. Um, Actually, this thing right here is diagnostic settings, as you can see, but don't be confused about the log analytics must be. I think I need to change this, put this here, and I need to change this and put this here, right? So I think now we are better with this schema. This is for this. Yeah, now we're good. Okay. All right. More than that, we have Network Watcher. Okay. So for monitor, we also have Network Watcher. Network Watcher will bring us networking troubleshooting and network analysis. So you can have a very important tool right there, which is Connection Monitor. With Connection Monitor, you can set up a test group. With the test group, you can do from some source to some destination, and this could be outside Azure. You can set up the tests you need. You can specify latency accepted, for example. And and with this, and also with all of these that we have talked about monitor, you can set up alerts. From the alerts, you can have notifications, and you can have actions for this. Also, for the network watcher, you have a lot of tools that will help you to verify your NSGs. Oh, what is NSG? We need to we need to go back to the networking part. The NSG is the main configuration you can have for your VNets to control traffic. So when you want to have many subnets and you want to control traffic based on source, destination, port, and protocol, you will use network security groups. Look like NS6, no, network security groups. Network security groups can be attached to a network interface or to a subnet, and you can control based on port, protocol, source, and destination who can talk with who. Remember that the system routes will allow me by default the communication between subnets, but I can restrict this with network security groups. And if I want to group my virtual machines, for example, and use those groups as a source or destination of my traffic, I can also use application security groups. So I can build a group of VMs. For example, I have three VMs responsible for the web part of my application, other two VMs responsible for the database. I can create two application security groups, a application security group web and application security group database, and I can use these application security groups as a source and destination with my network security group. So for example, I can set that I will allow inbound traffic from application security group web to application security group database from port 1433 TCP. So what I'm doing, I am allowing the web machines to access my database, my SQL database. If I don't have this, I need to put all the range of the IPs from the databases that I have. Is just this. Just replace IPs for a tag, which is a security application security group. In the network watcher, you have many tools to test this configuration. If your network security groups are working, they are working properly. If you have any problems in terms of routes, if you have any problems from your VPN, so you have IP flow verify, you have the next hop, you have VPN troubleshooting, you have traffic analytics for the network security groups. So many things that I encourage you to go there and test. All right. So with those 3 hours and 6 minutes, I want to say thank you. You were brave to be here all this time. Of course, this live is being recorded, is being available to you from right now on YouTube. If this content was valuable to you, just share, comment, put your questions in the video and in the comments of this video here below, and like, subscribe, and we can be here more times spreading this knowledge to you. Well, thank you very much for being here, and see you soon. Thank you. Bye bye.